Hey there everyone, Afrodo Reviews here, bringing you another book to decide. Is it worth reading over second breakfast? Or to deserve the fiery pit of Mount Doom? Being dramatic. Okay, I think my... Yeah, hi. Hi. Yeah, as you can see, my dog's in here with me today. They did not want to be left outside, and they don't understand my drama. Anyways, as you can also see, I got a new chair, but it isn't, its hydraulics are kind of broken, and I could see myself sinking here. So you're going to have to deal with me being a little shorter today. Or changing size vary as I get tired of it. For today's book, we'll be reviewing the first book in the Grey Griffins saga. Written by Derek Benz and J.S. Lewis, we have The Revenge of the Shadow King. Now, this book was published on March 13th, 2006. Looking it up, it's the first of a trilogy. I actually thought the book series was longer when I first picked it up in the TBR, because I remember reading all three, but I thought there was at least one more, I think based on how the third ended. It's also one of the more lesser-known works I've done on this channel, because looking up the ratings, there was nowhere near the amount of ratings that I found for even some of the other books that I had. Quick preview here. Apart from these things, though, I actually couldn't find much on the book itself. Like, no awards, no interesting trivia, nothing else. This book almost feels like it just kind of exists to a certain degree. And I guess I can understand that, but I'll get into that more later. Before we dive too deep into the book, we start where we always do. The cover. I actually like this cover quite a bit. As you guys can see, it is a cover of a creature hanging out in a treetop. The tree in the middle of the autumn, as it glares down on you, extending a malicious claw at you with black, vacant eyes. This creature is known as the Slayer Goblin in the book, and this cover does a really good job portraying the maliciousness and the terror that can come with meeting the Slayer Goblin that the characters often experience in their first meeting with it. In addition, you also get a good clear of the temperature and time frame of there, as well as just a general feel what the book's going to be about. I even like the little shiny reflective colors and the shiny reflective silver and the font up here. Just, it speaks fantasy to me, along with this clever little the first of the trilogy being in the O rather than like just right here on the side. I mean, it's still on the side, but that's not the point. The back, there's not much to talk about. It's mostly just the tree cover extended onto the back with the synopsis, which I've already read in the TBR. If you're interested in knowing the synopsis, check out the TBR. As well as the printing company and a small little quote from Jenny Nemo. Nemo? I think it's Nemo. Jenny Nemo, which hypes up the book a bit. For those of you who don't know her, she actually wrote the Charlie Bone series. I don't have one now. I don't have one, but I did read a couple in middle school. All in all, I actually like this cover quite a bit. Now, the story of this book, as read in the synopsis of my TBR, is, I described it sort of like Stranger Things, but instead of the kids using D&D, they play Magic the Gathering every Saturday instead of. And that pretty much still held true when I read through it. See, basically the premise of the book is these four friends, Max, Natalia, Harvey, and Ernie, all meet together at least once a week. It doesn't actually clarify what the meeting schedule is, which, I mean, kind of accurate. But anyways, they meet every so often in this antiquity shop where the owner of the shop runs a sort of D&D Magic the Gathering kind of game. Card game, where they have to work, they either fight each other or they fight him as the goblin leader with a card game. It doesn't really specify how the card game works, so unfortunately I can't give you much more than that. Like I said, it's like Magic the Gathering, but there's also clear elements of D&D in there as well. So now, as time goes on, though, they begin to notice strange creatures that were only existed in their game begin to appear in their world. At least that's what the synopsis says. That's kind of misleading a bit, but to go into that is more of a spoiler. And they begin to realize that the card game itself is not really as rooted into fiction as it seems to be, actually being more of a bestiary split up into a card game and presented as fake. Basically, and as time goes on, friends and bullies start getting possessed by this malevolent spirit that seems to be trying to free the other horrors that have been trapped. It's hard to go too deep into this without just being flat out spoiler territory. But Max actually finds a tome in his late grandpa's room that has all the creatures in his little card game. And he accidentally releases one. Then, at the behest of that one, releases another. And that one is like a super malicious shadow spirit that seems to work to try to free everything else in the tome, including awful things. So Max and his friends, the Grey Griffins, have to team up and start dealing with the problems that this is causing. As not only is it affecting their town and potentially the world, but also it's directly targeting them as well. Before we really start going into the story, I just want to leave a small disclaimer here. Talking about this story is going to be a little harder than normal, mostly because this is a children's novel. Now, I made a mistake when I first recorded my TBR, though I did correct with the subtitles. Yeah, you don't make mistakes. I corrected the subtitles, but this is a children's novel. This is not a young adult novel. So I had to be aware of that while I was writing my critique and my review of it. In the sense that I can't really get mad at it for certain things. For example, as an adult, when you read children's novel, you'll never really ever get the sense that the children in the novel are in danger. This is more about these kids experiencing their own type of fantasy, and you don't want it to be too harrowing for them. In addition to that, you probably won't ever get deep characterization like you would with even some young adult novels, as characters will rarely go beyond the archetype that they were designed in. Even the main character tends to just basically be a blank slate character that has some problems to be relatable, but not enough that you can't use him as wish fulfillment. Max in this is our main character, and he's a perfect example. His parents are going through divorce, which he blames himself for, and that's relatable, but he's also a super rich kid who gets karate lessons. His parents buy him can buy him an entire town for his birthday if they really wanted to, and so on. So there's still so much to him that I still want to be him. He just has some problems I can relate to as well. There's also the issue where, I guess to go back to the danger thing a bit more, there's never going to be a sense that they're truly in danger because, there is exception to the rules. Like, Holes is a good example of it not doing the specific thing I'm going to talk about. But even when they are in danger, and there seems like there's no way out, there will be something that gets them out. A coincidence if nothing has been set up. And this happens quite a few times in this book as well. Whether they're being chased by a monster, or a monster has them cornered, and then by some coincidence they're saved, and they're allowed to keep going. And a general good rule of thumb is never rely on coincidences to get your characters out of trouble. Getting them into trouble, it's way more forgivable. But getting them out of trouble, it's not. So a good rule of thumb is that if you can only use a coincidence to get your characters out of trouble once. And from there, you have to set everything up. So yeah, you also have to be aware of that more often than you would in a normal novel as well. You have to be more forgiving. To stop beating around the bush, I'll talk about what I liked. So what I did like about this book. I think that it uses its concept really well. The idea of this card game actually being based around real threats that used to exist in the world to help prepare kids who play it for what might come if it ever got free again, along with their villains actually being fairly menacing and dangerous seeming when they were given a chance to be so. A slight downgrade is, they're never gonna hurt. Anyways, the Slayer Goblin is one of the mainish antagonists, and you really do get a sense that it is a creature of malevolent intelligence that seems to exist solely to hunt and hurt the main characters. While their human antagonist, Ray, is also creepy and dangerous when he's possessed. That being said, again, just beware that the characters are never seemingly going to be in real danger. There's always going to be something that will get them out. Being a kid's book, that's kind of why I end that section. So now I talk about what I didn't like. So let's start simply. I'm not an English major. I'm not pretending to be one. However, I have read a lot of books. And I can already tell you right now, how this book is written is strange, mechanically. I'm going to talk about the mechanics of the book on this, and that's something I don't do often, so let's start with something simple, like the analogies that this book uses, and how strange and weird they are. You get what they're trying to say, but it's just done in such a weird way that you can't help but stop and kind of scratch your head and be like, that was weird, but okay. And I don't know if maybe it's just sort of a regional thing, like maybe the authors are from England and these are the more common analogies over there, or these would make sense as analogies, but they don't to me. For a couple examples here. There's at one point where Ernie and Max are in a clock tower, and the narration describes the bell in the clock tower as hanging upside down like a giant iron vampire bat. And it's like, I get what it's going for, but that's such a clunky way of using that analogizing it that you don't really. It just kind of makes you stop and say, okay. Another example is when they're being chased by the Slayer Goblin. And the narration describes the Slayer Goblin coming after them like an evil wind. And it's just one of those, why did you feel the need to say evil wind? It could have been, was coming after them like the wind, which is more simple, but less likely to cause people to go, what? You know what I mean? But that isn't the only small aspect I found strange. Another good thing to talk about is the character names. Now, you have the two of them. You have a couple, which if I told you the vaguest basics of this character, this would probably be the first name that pops in your head. Like the blank slate character who's supposed to serve as an author as the audience stand-in, but is also extremely rich and lives in a castle. Obviously, this character is going to be named Grayson Maximilian Sumner III. Or there's a studious girl from Russia in here. The first name that probably comes to your mind is Natalia Romanoff. And I'm also 90% sure that this is a subtle wink and nod to Natasha Romanoff, aka the Black Widow. Since this was written in 2006, and the Black Widow was a more B-lister, C-lister kind of comic book character, I'm not sure if that's true. And then you have weird names like Ernie Tweenie, which just sounds like the parents hate him, because who names their kid Ernest knowing that their last name is going to be Tweenie? It'd be like naming him Teeny Tweenie. Anyway, or the big giant bully, Dennis Stonebrow. So this one's my personal favorite. This is where it just gets weird. Harley Davidson Einstein. That is the name of a main character in this book. One of the Grey Griffins' full name is Harley Davidson Einstein. Right? Just right? It's just so weird. Another bigger issue I had is that throughout the book there are these page breaks. Now, from my understanding, what you use page breaks for is to create a small gap in your narrative, to either typically explain away a switch in perspective or do a small time skip where the focus of the chapter is still on the same thing, but you wanted to note some time has passed. Like, you don't want to detail the characters walking all the way through a building they just went through. So you time skip to them walking out of the building and continuing the conversation. The page breaks in there though sometimes feel like they were meant to be the end of the chapter, but then the authors decided, oh, this chapter would be too short if we did that, and they just keep going. A good example is chapter 9. The chapter starts with them meeting Ivor. So they meet Ivor in these woods, and he's the guy who ran the card game round table. He's sort of like the DM. And it seems like it's gearing up for a chapter of exposition and explanation. Only 3 pages later, Ivor just sends him back home. There's a page break, and we're on a completely different perspective, and we're on a completely different narrative, not perspective. The rest of the chapter is about something else entirely. It doesn't even really go into meeting Ivor in the woods until much later, I think, in the next chapter. So after a certain point, it just kind of feels like, again, like it was supposed to be the end of a chapter, but the authors felt like the chapter was too short and decided to just cut it there. Another issue I had, a bit beyond the mechanical aspects, but still sort of falling into it, was it does not feel like Benz and Lewis have any faith in their audience. Like, I get it, kids, we typically don't see kids as very smart, but kids can handle more subtle, more you don't need to point everything out to kids. And this book does not feel like it trusts kids to get what they're saying. It doesn't trust them to understand characters or the story. A pretty good example, without spoiling, is the character Max. His parents are currently undergoing a divorce. Now, this divorce has been hard on him as he sort of blames himself for it happening, and he just wants his parents to get along and do it again, which most kids who've had their parents go through a divorce sort of feels the same. Not me. My parents needed to get a divorce. They were fighting all the time. I'm not going to go into my own issues. How do you know Max is suffering from his parents' divorce? The first 40 pages only tell you 9 times. Yeah, seriously, every chapter, every 10 pages, it feels like it needs to remind you Max's parents are going through a divorce, and it's very hard on Max. And it's just one of those, I get it, okay? I get it. You don't need to repeat it every time. You can just trust your audience to get the fact that the kid is suffering because his parents are going through a divorce. And again, it's kind of like Holes. Holes trusted its audience to understand what it was saying. It was a shorter book, but it didn't treat its audience like idiots, like this book kind of does at times. Now, for the final complaint that I had, again, I guess it goes more into mechanical aspect of it, is that the point of view narration is not done well. It sort of feels like the book is written in a third-person omniscient point of view, which for those of you who don't know means that basically it's being told by an omnipotent, objective narrator who's in everyone's head and can tell you everyone's thoughts at the same time. But the book itself reads like it's told in the first-person perspective. Biased narration, limited scope, things like that. And it sort of tries to blend the two, but it doesn't really succeed. The way the book is told, it feels like it would be better suited for first-person narration. But you would have to rewrite a lot because it just flat out says, this character thought this of this character during this moment. Yeah, that's impressive, huh? Like, I mean, that's actually how the book is. This character thought this. That's impressive, huh? The best example I can think of is when you get the first school moment and someone does something to the fountain in the school, which causes it to shoot up like rancid black mud out of it. During this moment, we're introduced to the principal of the school, who gets a borderline cruel introduction explaining why everyone in school calls him Piggy. To the point that the book itself just refers to him as Piggy for the rest of the book. Again, this is told by a third-person narrative, who is supposed to be more of a neutral, objective point of view, rather than this biased thing. If this was being told in the first-person point of view by Max, referring to the principal as Piggy from here on out would have at least made sense. But since the third-person narration does it, you're left to assume that his name is actually Piggy, almost. So that's all I really have to say about this book. What rating do I feel it deserves? 5 out of 10. For all my complaints with this book, I still very much am aware that this is a children's book, and I am nowhere near the target audience. That being said, there's a lot of things that... And there was a lot of complaints I held back because of that. The way the characters are, so on, so on. I can't personally recommend picking up this book if you're an adult, or... That's really if you're an adult. If you're more in the middle school age, when I read it, give it a try. Maybe even early high school. But... if you're looking for older, more mature reading, even if it's a young adult, I do not recommend picking up The Revenge of the Shadow King. Unfortunately, this was kind of the thing I was worried about when I did my Nostalgia Month and reviewed a whole bunch of my old nostalgic books, is I was worried it was going to be something like this. So, I don't think it deserves Mount Doom either, as tempted as I am to toss it in there, because again, it's a children's book. Sort of like with SWF. I didn't like it, but it is a children's book, and I'm sure that... And there are circumstances around it that I don't think it deserves to be tossed in a Mountain Dew. So, yeah. Now, for those of you who've watched my TBR, you know what's coming next. I read out the list of books I'm going to do and in what order I will be doing them. And I want you to be aware. I've rehearsed the next one quite a bit. But until then, remember, with every book comes an adventure, and every adventure is worth having, even if it's a bad one. And I'm going to start doing this in the video proper. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you like what you've seen here today and you want to see more books coming out. I also want to put out more than just book reviews, such as video essays, top 5 lists, sort of stuff like that. So I'm going to try to get them out this week, but until then, who knows?